Maggie finally made the choice everyone thought would bring clarity, and somehow it only made everything more complicated. That is why Sullivan's Crossing Season 4, Episode 9 hits so hard. Because this is not the kind of penultimate episode that gives you closure. It gives you emotional truth, then immediately asks whether truth is enough to fix what time has already damaged. Hey, what's up everyone? Come back to Breakdown Epic. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Now today, we are breaking down why this penultimate episode may be one of the most important emotional turning points the show has ever done. Because on the surface, it looks like Maggie finally reaches the answer she has been circling all season. But underneath that, the episode is doing something much more interesting. It is not asking who Maggie loves. It is asking whether love by itself is enough to heal doubt, rebuild trust, and undo the emotional damage caused by hesitation. And honestly, I think that is why the ending works so well. It does not reward the audience with a clean romantic payoff.
It forces us to sit in the exact same uncertainty Maggie has been living in. So let's get into it. The first thing I think this episode makes clear is that Maggie's season-long conflict was never really just a love triangle. Yes, Liam mattered. Yes, Cal mattered. But the deeper conflict was always internal. Maggie has spent this season carrying emotional weight from every direction. Old love, present connection, responsibility, guilt, expectation, and the fear of making the wrong choice. So when she finally moves toward honesty, the moment means more than just choosing one person. It means choosing a version of herself. That is huge, because for most of the season, Maggie has not been living clearly. She has been reacting, managing, avoiding, trying to be fair to everyone, and in the process, never being fully honest with herself. That kind of emotional paralysis can look thoughtful from the outside, but over time, it starts hurting everyone in the room, especially the people waiting for a real answer. And that is where Cal comes in, because if there is one thing this episode understands, it is that Cal's role in the story was never just the safer option. That would be too easy, too shallow.
What Cal represents is consistency. Presence, the version of love that shows up every day instead of living inside memory. That matters because memory can be powerful, but consistency is what builds a future. Liam, on the other hand, represents something very different. He is unresolved feeling. He is history. He is emotion that was never fully processed because life interrupted it before it could end cleanly. So every time Maggie is around him, she is not just reacting to who he is now, she is reacting to everything that was left unfinished. That is why this story has been so difficult for her. It was never just present versus past. It was longing versus stability. And those are not the same thing. Now here is where the episode gets really smart. Maggie reaches a point where she is finally ready to stop living inside uncertainty. She is ready to name what she feels, ready to stop carrying old fear and emotional confusion like armor. In another show, that would be the release moment, the confession, the music swell, the scene where the audience breathes out and says, finally. But Sullivan's Crossing does not do that. Instead, the response she gets creates even more tension. And that is exactly the right choice. Because real emotional complications are not solved the second one person becomes brave enough to speak.
Timing matters. Trust matters. History matters. The person on the receiving end of that honesty is not obligated to be emotionally waiting in the exact same place. And in my opinion, that is where Cal's final words become so important. They are not just dialogue. They are the whole argument of the episode. Because what the ending seems to suggest is that love is not only about recognition, it is also about timing, emotional reliability, and whether someone can trust that what you are offering now will still be true tomorrow. That is much harder, much more adult, and honestly, much more painful. Now, I want to pause here for 1 second and say this directly. If you watched that ending and immediately felt frustrated, confused, or even a little angry, I think that reaction makes complete sense because the episode deliberately withholds the easy reward. It gives Maggie growth, but it does not immediately turn that growth into comfort. Instead, it asks the audience to sit with the possibility that sometimes realizing your truth is only the first step.
The harder part is whether the person you want is still emotionally available to receive it.
That is brutal, but it is also good writing. Now let's bring Liam back into the conversation, because what I really liked about this episode is that it quietly shifts his importance without making him disappear. Liam is no longer just the active romantic complication. He becomes something more symbolic. He is the pressure point that forced Maggie to finally confront herself. That does not make him irrelevant. It makes him catalytic, and that is a big difference. A weaker version of this story would have turned Liam into the obvious alternative and just waited for the audience to pick sides. But this episode makes him part of the emotional process rather than the entire answer. He matters because he reawakens things in Maggie that she cannot ignore. But the ending suggests that awakening feeling and building a future are still two separate questions. That is what makes the whole thing more mature than a basic triangle. Now, let's do a quick contrast, because I think this episode almost demands it. On one side, you have Liam memory intensity, unfinished emotion.
The part of Maggie's life that still feels alive because it never truly closed. On the other side, you have Cal. Stability, trust, consistency. The part of Maggie's life that could actually become a future if she chooses it fully. And the tragedy is that both of those things can be real at the same time. That is why this hurts. Because nobody in this episode feels fake. Nobody feels easy to dismiss. And that is exactly why the finale now has such a difficult job. Now, I want to talk about Maggie's decision more directly, because I think it may be the most important step her character has taken in 4 seasons. Not because of who she chooses, because of how she arrives there. She stops trying to make the perfect emotional move that keeps everyone safe. She stops hiding inside uncertainty. She actually reaches for honesty. That matters, even if the outcome is messy. In fact, it matters more because the outcome is messy. Growth that gets rewarded instantly can feel satisfying. Growth that costs something feels real. And I think this episode understands that. Now, here comes the mini cliffhanger inside all of this.
What if the finale is not actually about whether Maggie chooses someone? What if it is about whether the people around her can still trust the version of her that finally made a choice? Because that is the next layer now. Maggie may know what she feels, but Cal has to decide what he believes, and that is not the same thing. That is why I don't think the finale is going to be a simple romantic resolution. I think it's going to be about emotional consequences. Can trust be rebuilt once hesitation has already done damage? Can honesty arrive late and still be enough? Can love survive timing that never lined up properly? Those are the real questions now. And honestly, I think that is why this penultimate episode works so much better than if it had given us an easy answer. It sets up the finale with real emotional stakes instead of just romantic suspense. Now let's do a rapid-fire breakdown of why this ending lands so hard. Maggie finally stops hiding from herself. Cal's response suggests he may have been emotionally moving in a different direction than she realized. Liam's role shifts from romantic alternative to emotional catalyst. The season theme evolves from who will she choose into can love survive delay, and the finale now has to resolve not just attraction, but trust. That is the real shift. Now, here's the quiet part, and this might be the most important part. I think what this episode is really saying is that love is not always enough when it shows up late. Sometimes you can love someone and still not know how to stand in front of the damage your hesitation created. Sometimes you can finally tell the truth and still not get the answer you wanted because the other person needed that truth much earlier. That does not make the feeling less real. It just makes the timing more tragic. And I think that is exactly where Cal and Maggie now stand. Not in a place where love is absent, in a place where love may no longer be the only thing that matters. That is devastating and honest at the same time. Now, if we're talking final predictions, here's where I land.
I think the finale is going to force one final emotional decision, but not in the way people expect. I do not think this is just about whether Maggie ends up with Liam or Cal. I think the finale is about whether she can build trust with the person she chooses after everything this season has cost him.
If the answer is yes, then the ending can still feel hopeful. If the answer is no, then the season may end on a note that is much sadder and much more realistic than fans were expecting. Personally, I think there is still a path forward for Maggie and Cal, but only if the finale treats that path like work, not destiny. No magical reset, no instant forgiveness, no pretending episode 9 did not happen. Let them earn it if that is where the story is going. And if the show goes the other way, then it needs to fully commit to that too. No halfway ending, no emotional fence-sitting, no fake peace. Because after an episode like this, the only satisfying finale is one that understands the damage was real. So overall, I think this penultimate episode succeeded because it turned Maggie's choice into something much deeper than a romantic answer. It became a question about identity, timing, trust, and whether emotional honesty can still matter when it arrives after too much silence. And that is why the finale suddenly feels a lot more complicated than just who ends up together.
But anyway, that is my breakdown of Sullivan's Crossing Season 4, Episode 9, and why Maggie's decision may be the biggest turning point of the entire season. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Do you think love is enough to fix what Maggie and Cal broke? Or did this episode quietly tell us that some things cannot be repaired just because the truth finally comes out? I will catch you in the next one.